There's a piece of career advice floating around that basically says jump jobs every 2 years. Don't get comfortable, keep moving. And the salary data backs it up. People who switch companies frequently tend to out-earn those who stay loyal by a pretty significant margin over time. But then there's the other camp, the people who've watched colleagues bounce around endlessly and end up with a resume that looks like a flight itinerary. Lots of movement, not a lot of depth. Lots of starting over, not a lot of compounding. And here's the thing, both camps are right, just not at the same time and not for every person. So let's work through this properly. When jumping makes sense, when staying makes sense, and how to tell the difference when it actually matters. Start with the uncomfortable truth about salary. The single fastest way to get a significant pay raise at most companies is to leave. Not to ask, not to perform better, to leave, or at least credibly threaten to. Internal pay increases are almost always capped, 3%, 5% if it's been a great year. Meanwhile, someone coming in from outside for the same role gets offered market rate, which in a lot of industries over the last decade has been substantially higher than what the person already sitting in the chair is making. This isn't a conspiracy, it's just how incentives work. Retention budgets are smaller than hiring budgets. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, except the wheel that left already and went somewhere else. That's the wheel that got the raise. Beyond salary, there's the skill ceiling problem. Most roles have a natural learning curve. First 6 months, steep. Next 6 months, still growing. Year 2, things are getting familiar. Year 3, a lot of people are essentially doing the same job they were doing in year 1, just faster. The environment stops challenging and starts just existing. And that plateau is sneaky because it's comfortable. The work is familiar, the people are familiar, there's no anxiety of being new. But comfort and growth are often in direct tension with each other. And a career that stops growing for too long is a career that's quietly losing ground. There's also the network argument. Every time someone moves to a new company, they plug into a new set of people, new ways of doing things, new industry relationships. Over a 15-year career, someone who's been at 3 or 4 companies has a fundamentally richer professional network than someone who spent those same 15 years in one place. And networks compound. The value of who someone knows doesn't grow linearly, it grows exponentially. Here's where it gets more interesting, because the pro-hopping narrative glosses over some real costs. The first year at any new job is mostly just calibration. Learning the culture, figuring out the real power structure, understanding what's actually valued versus what gets said in all-hands meetings. Real impact, the kind that shows up on a resume and builds a reputation, usually starts in year 2. Which means someone who leaves at the 18-month mark is often leaving right before the interesting part. There's also the compounding of trust and credibility inside an organization. The longer someone is somewhere, the more they're trusted with genuinely complex, high-stakes work. The institutional knowledge they build becomes a form of leverage. They understand context that a new hire would take a year to catch up on. They know where the bodies are buried, metaphorically. That knowledge has real value, and it gets left on the table every time someone starts over. And then there's the reputation risk of moving too fast. The data on frequent switching is real, but there's a threshold. 2, 3 companies over a decade looks like someone who's curious and growth-oriented. 5, 6 companies in the same period starts raising questions in hiring managers' heads. Not always fair questions, but real ones. Why did they keep leaving? What am I not seeing? The stigma is less than it is to be, but it hasn't disappeared. Also worth naming, not every company is equal. There are certain organizations that are genuinely career-defining to have on a resume. A few years at one of those places can open doors for decades, and those opportunities often require patience. Leaving early to chase a salary bump somewhere mediocre can be a trade of long-term positioning for short-term cash. Sometimes that's the right call, but it's worth knowing that's what's happening. So how does someone actually make this call in practice? A few questions worth sitting with honestly. Is the learning still happening? Not just getting better at the current job, but genuinely acquiring skills or perspective that will matter in 5 years. If the answer is no, and that's been the answer for a while, that's a real signal.
Comfort that isn't producing growth is just a slow plateau with a salary attached. Is the compensation gap real? Worth actually doing the market research, not just assuming. Talk to recruiters. Look at what similar roles are paying externally. Understand where the current salary sits relative to market. Some people discover they're being paid fairly. Some people discover they've been chronically underpaid while delivering well above expectations. The second group has a very different calculation to make. Is there a visible path forward? Not a vague, yeah, you're doing great from a manager, but an actual concrete path. A role, a title, a project, a set of responsibilities that represent genuine progression. If that path doesn't exist, or if every conversation about it stays vague, that's important information. What's driving the urge to leave? This one matters a lot. Jumping towards something, a better opportunity, a bigger challenge, a specific skill to acquire, tends to work out. Jumping away from something, a bad manager, a frustrating culture, general burnout, is riskier because those things have a way of following. A new environment doesn't automatically fix the patterns that created the friction in the old one. How long has it actually been? Less than a year is almost always too early unless something has genuinely broken down. 2 to 3 years is often the sweet spot for a move. Enough time to have made real impact, not so long that the skill ceiling has fully arrived. 5+ years starts requiring an honest question about what's actually keeping someone there. There's a version of job hopping that's strategic and intentional. And there's a version that's just anxiety wearing a productivity costume. Some people jump because they've genuinely outgrown a place. Some people jump because they're conflict avoidant and leaving feels cleaner than having a hard conversation with the manager. Some people jump because they're chasing a feeling, the excitement of something new, and they've never noticed that the feeling always fades around the 18-month mark regardless of where they are. Understanding which version is happening is probably the most important part of this whole thing, because the data on switching in salary is real, but the data doesn't capture the person who's been switching for 10 years and still hasn't figured out what they're building toward. A career that's optimized purely for salary without a directional sense of where it's going can end up well paid and weirdly hollow at 40. That's not a judgment, it's just a risk worth naming. The best version of this is probably someone who knows what they're building, knows the value they bring, watches the market honestly, moves when the move is genuinely additive, and stays when staying is still producing something real. That's harder than just always be jumping, but it's also harder than just staying loyal out of inertia. The loyalty gets rewarded model that a lot of people grew up with, it worked in a specific economic era, for a specific type of employment relationship. That era is mostly gone. Companies don't do 30-year careers anymore. Pensions are largely a historical artifact. The implicit contract between employer and employee has changed pretty dramatically, and a lot of people are still operating on the old terms without realizing it. At the same time, the always be moving mantra that's popular in career content right now treats jobs like they're all interchangeable, and movement is always progress. It isn't. The honest answer is that switching jobs can be one of the smartest career moves someone makes, and it can also be an expensive distraction from actually building something. Usually, which one it is comes down to whether there's real intention behind the move, or just restlessness looking for a justification. That's the question worth sitting with. Not should I job hop in the abstract, but why do I actually want to move, and where does this next step take me? Drop in the comments, have you jumped frequently and benefited, or stayed loyal and regretted it? Genuinely curious where people land on this one.